So what we are covering here is what kind of collaboration or co-production do you want to do, and what are the different ways it can be manifested? In this tutorial, we provide examples and resources related to co-production and engagement, and we share snippets of interviews with EFI community members who have experience engaging with end users and interested parties. From full engagement with a defined collaboration to simply providing information, working with interested parties, end users, and stakeholders can take on a variety of appearances. The depth of involvement depends not only on your question and goals, but also on the impact your work can have on a group of people. For example, consideration of different cultures and traditions is critical to protecting people's livelihoods in some cases, while thinking about different business practices and underlying goals are sometimes needed to protect proprietary information and can also impact problem identification and forecast goals. Listening to different groups, particularly marginalized groups, builds trust and can increase the impact of your work. Next, Chris Jones provides an example of the process of engagement to make connections and use local knowledge to develop a model of sudden oak death, or SOD, in Oregon.
So it was mainly like build that relationship with Oregon Department of Forestry, and then that kind of expanded out. At first, we were kind of like just exchanging emails back and forth, and then we did a workshop out there in 2017 looking at the model, the interface, the data that goes into the model. And kind of a couple big takeaways that came out of that was that the host map that we were using, which is where the trees are that can be infected by sod, which is the driver of spread in our model, was based off their experience in the field. And it was a model produced by folks at Oregon State University. So we came back and we made our own model for that better matched up with and included their local knowledge into that process on where they have seen it, where they haven't seen the host. Because the other one was produced just from FIA data and interpolation. So we took that kind of larger process and then included extra information and got a better map out of it, which was nice. Okay. And then we took that back in 2019 and they were like, that's great. And they also gave us a bunch of input on what they wanted the interface to look like. So they wanted more years to be able to simulate. So not just originally we're like, you can simulate 1 year, like do the management in 1 year and then simulate forward for like 3 to 5 to see how 1 year of management changed. But like, the way our funding works is it's funded in 2-year increments, but 4 years out. So we need to know what 2 years and 4 years of funding look like in order to properly plan for what they budget for us.
Thinking about engagement, there are a few helpful definitions. One term that may not be familiar is co-production. This concept is defined as a collaborative and equitable process that brings different groups together to create methods, systems, or define problems that are needed to address mutual interests. As you can see on the plot, this often takes the most time and engagement, as it involves coordinating meetings, brainstorming and collating ideas, and then working together to develop and refine the project and implement outcomes. Deliberation can be thought of as a step below co-production with less engagement, but still engaging interested parties to determine goals and directions, relevant issues and problems, and potential solutions to those problems. Communication is at the bottom left of this plot, and this involves little time commitment and typically is a one-way delivery of information to interested parties of plans or results, but which does little to get input from others. Consultation is a step above communication where there's some limited input from interested parties or stakeholders. Because time and resources can be limited, co-production may not be possible for all projects. We've linked to a paper by Mark Reed and colleagues in the discussion box that discusses these 4 types of ways to engage and considering who is leading and who is initiating the project to give you some more details about this. The main takeaway is that engagement looks different depending on what your project is and how important it is for interested parties to participate. Engagement can also be thought of as a spectrum, as you can see by the Spectrum of Community Engagement table developed by the Nature Conservancy. Here, TNC separates engagement into 6 different principles: ignore, inform, consult, involve, collaborate, and defer to. As you can imagine, on the extreme end with ignore, interested parties are actively shut out from any decision-making process, resulting in marginalization. The informed strategy is where researchers simply provide information about their directions or identification of problems and goals instead of involving interested parties in decision-making. Consultation results in a limited voice for the interested parties, but is beginning to involve others in developing goals and strategies to problem solving. By involving interested parties, they are now given a voice in the decision-making process, and their suggestions, needs, and ideas are incorporated from the beginning. Collaboration takes this involvement a step further by delegating power to the interested parties and giving them a leadership role in the development of the project or forecast. Finally, community ownership is provided when we defer to the interested party and put the decision-making in their hands. Another engagement model example is the Indigenous Community Participation Model put forth by Dominic Davis Chavez and Michael Gavin, which describes levels of community participation ranging from contractual, which is low community participation that is employment related, to consultative, to collaborative, to collegial, to Indigenous, which has the highest level of community participation where all aspects of a study are contextualized and decided upon within the community. The Indigenous level is similar to the defer to level in the TNC model. In the next interview snippets, you'll hear a range of examples of the ways others in the EFI community have engaged with interested parties.
I'd say my experience has been from experience by doing. So I've kind of ended up in a way of working by getting mistakes along the way and seeing what worked well, and then coming up with like an evidence-based approach to how I work with people. So my career began with where you wrote a research grant and then you did the research and then you hopefully gave it to someone who might have remembered they asked for it at the end. And I found that pretty unsatisfactory because my research was not being used by people. And so I probably then focused more on, say, a co-delivery end before research was being completed, tried to involve people in what that would mean for them. And Chow, that's an example of what you're doing now with the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park. You know, you've got that bit of work coming out about refuges, and now you're starting to prepare that group of people for what those results will mean. So that's the helping it land better stage. I then started to think about how you do that more formally by including industry partners in projects, so that then they made that co-delivery start even earlier. And so I probably started from the wanting it to be delivered better and then working back to involving people in the projects, but probably still thinking I could design a project better than any of you, so not involving people in design as much as I do now in later parts of my career. And so now I have probably recognized that, in fact, you land stuff even better if people are involved from the beginning. And so my evolution has come from delivery through to working together to actually designing at the beginning.
I don't know if you would really consider it interactive in the way that you would do now, where in co-production, because it was, as I had said before, a learning experience. And I think both sides were learning how to proceed. Okay, this was one of the, if not the first ecological forecast that NOAA put out, short-term forecast. Maybe coral reef bleaching was previous. And I think once the Weather Service became aware of that, they became very interested. And so they started pushing this ecological forecasting within NOAA. So that would be a stakeholder, but also a user, because maybe not an end user. And I distinguish end users from, say, super user or intermediate users, because within NOAA, you have these different line offices: fisheries, the Weather Service, Ocean Service. And so you try to supply them with the information they need, that such that they can use that and then add value to it. And it's not just the oystermen in the bay that I'm trying to give this information to. And it's interesting, as an aside, they weren't really interested in the sea nettle concentration. They were interested in salinity and temperature. So in addition to the sea nettle probability of encounter I put on, I also had salinity and temperature that went into that prediction, because the oysters one needs a certain salinity. And so if it was too high or too low, I can't remember right now, you know, they would move their aquaculture pens or not proceed with one aspect of their, you know, procedure or not. So it was interesting that, and I'm glad that I put the foundational parameters, variables in there for forecasts, as well as the end product. Mm-hmm. So I was learning that, but it's only through this email that I learned about this. Also, something that came up, and not this, I guess, could have been an end user, or it was, is within Chesapeake Bay, there's a nuclear power plant at Calvert Cliffs that supplies electricity to the surrounding area, and I'm not exactly sure if it reaches up to Baltimore or whatnot. Well, they use water, obviously, from the bay off of Calvert Cliffs to cool the nuclear reactions, and they have an intake valve, and it gets clogged, especially if there's sea nettles there and other like seaweed. And so there was one time we received an email from them saying, we really like your predictions. They're probability, not density, but they are somewhat related. And they would time determine the frequency of the cleaning of those input based on those forecast maps of sea nettles. Okay, and one time there were so many sea nettles in that region that it clogged their intake valve, so they had to reduce the power output by 25-30%, which is significant. Yeah. So that was one end user that I never ever considered, right? I would think someone swimming in the bay may use it or whatnot. Mm-hmm. Another example is someone was saying, hey, look, I'm thinking of buying a house, or I don't know if they're camp or whatnot, on the bay. Could you tell me where the sea nettles are mostly, on a climatological basis, on a seasonal basis? Mm-hmm. They're only there in the summertime, but where over time do they tend to be, or where do they tend not to be? Because I guess that person wanted to go swimming and not get stung. And so, once again, do I get into this territory? Because I say, no, you really shouldn't go there, because that affects potentially the housing market, and the real estate agents could get down on me. I'm not going to buy this house because I don't want to go swimming where there's sea nettles. So those sort of liability or potential liability aspects come into this decision-making process. But it's a learning process that I never thought of the users would look at it, and the consequences of providing that information to the public.
Like, for example, there was a coffee cooperative that I worked with in one of the communities that I was doing sort of field work in, and I got to know the leaders of the cooperative, and they like really great people, and one of them hosted me for dinner, and the other one sort of took me around and showed me around, and that was all hugely valuable and really helpful. But then they were, I was saying, like, I would love to help you. Like, is there anything that you need? And they were like, yeah, can you give one of the things that our constituents or our co-op members struggle with is with crop storage, and they need help and like expertise in crop storage. Is that something that you can provide? And I was like, no, I know nothing about crop storage. I was like, I could Google something, but that is not a value that I can provide for you. And I felt horrible. It made me feel more extractive, right? But then I had a conversation with them about things that I did know and and I was like, I don't know if any of this would be useful, but like, here's my expertise, and like, here's stuff that I do know that maybe would be helpful. And we ended up landing on a discussion really with a bunch of local community-based organization leads that were affiliated with their program, who wanted to know kind of how international NGOs operated. Like, how did they figure out where to work? How did they get their funding? And I was like, oh, that's actually something I'm pretty familiar with. I have worked with, or I've partnered with, or I know people who work for a lot of those international organizations. Like, I'm happy to have that discussion. They told me that that was really valuable to them. And it was not at all part of the project, but it was something that I could bring that provided value and made that partnership more valuable to them.
As you can see on the previous slides and in the interview snippets, the what of engagement can take on many different forms. When considering community engagement, time and money must be taken into account, not only for the researcher, but also for the interested parties or stakeholders. Maximizing the efforts of both the researcher and interested parties is important, and there must be value from the results of forecasts for both groups. In some cases, the proper level of engagement may take a long time to establish as trust and relationships are built. Having proper planning and evaluation with interested parties is crucial at all steps in the process, And while adjustments can certainly be made during the research and forecast development process, it is helpful to identify the type of engagement you want to do at the start of any project that has the potential for social impacts.